guys. So today what we want to look at is look at finding the exact value for other trig angle measures. So like what we're going to be looking at is like 165 degrees, and I want to be able to find like the sine of 165 degrees. I want to be able to find the cosine of 165 degrees and the tangent of 165 degrees. Well, these are not angle measures that are on the unit circle that I know the exact value for. So what we're going to talk about is ways to create those angle measures. And there are 6 different formulas that we can use. And I would want you guys to write these down. One deals with me adding 2 angle measures that get me that. So this is the cosine of 2 angle measures being added together that gets me that. The difference of 2 angle measures that get me that angle measure. The sum of 2 angle measures that get me some angle measure. The difference, the addition for tangent, and the difference for tan. So write these down when you guys are done. Let's jump ahead. And let's jump ahead to this question here. So I want to be able to find the sine, cosine, and tangent of 165 degrees. So when we look at the unit circle, I know 165 degrees is in quadrant 2, and it does not have an exact value that I know. Because I know what 120 is, I know what 135 is, and I know what 160 is, or 150 is. But I do not know what the tangent of the angle measure is for 165. So what I'm going to be doing is adding 2 angle measures, which are 135 and 30. So let's say we want to start off with the sine of 165 and find that exact value. So I'm going to be adding 2 angle measures that get me 165. So what I'm doing is looking at my chart and saying, hey, what gets me that angle measure? And then when I was looking at 165, I said, hey, I could add 135 and 30 because they're both on the unit circle to get me 165. So I know it's going to be the sum of 2 sines. So it's going to be sine of x. It's going to be this formula right here. Sine of x times cosine of y plus cosine x times the sine of y. So this is the x value, and that's the y value. So sine of 135 times the cosine of 30 plus the cosine of 135 times the sine of 30. So when I look at the sine of 135, that is radical 2 over 2. And when I look at the cosine of 30, that is 1/2. And then the cosine of 135 is negative radical 2 over 2. I'm just getting that from the unit circle or the chart that I gave you guys. And then the sine of 30 is radical 3 over 2. So now I'm just going to multiply these two terms. Radical 2 times 1 is just radical 2. And then negative, this is over 4. And then negative radical 2 times radical 3. Because both of these would go underneath the radical sign, I get negative square root of 6 over 4. So the exact value is radical 2 minus square root of 6 all over 4. So let's look at the cosine of 165. So these are the sum. So it's going to be cosine x, cosine y, minus sine x. So this is still going to be xy. So I'm going to have cosine of 135 times the cosine of 30 minus the sine of 135 times the sine of 30. So the cosine of 135 is negative radical 2 over 2. The sine of 30 is 1/2 minus the sine of 135 is radical 2 over 2. And then the sine of 30 is radical 3 over 2. So both of these will have a denominator of 4. And I will end up with negative square root of 2 minus radical 6. So that's negative radical 2 minus radical 6 all over 4. So let's look at the tangent. Tangent's a little bit more complicated. So it's the tan of x plus the tan of y over 1 minus tan x tan y. Well, so x was 135, and then y was 30. So the tan of 135 is negative 1, and the tan of 30 is radical 3. Then it's 1 minus negative 1 times radical 3. Okay? So that gets me negative 1 plus radical 3 over 1 plus radical 3. And how do I get rid of this out of my denominator? I multiply this by its conjugate, which is 1 minus square root of 3. So this is the conjugate. Okay? So I have a 1 minus square root of 3 on the denominator plus square root of 3 minus 3, because that gets me a minus 3. Negative 1 plus square root of 3 plus square root of 3 minus 3. So I end up with negative 2 plus 2 square root of 3 all over, or that's negative 4, all over negative 2, which gets me 2 minus square root of 3. And that's what the tangent of 135 is. I started you guys off on the next one, so try that one, and we'll see you tomorrow.